Well, welcome back to the podcast. We're back. We are back, episode 11. Welcome back, Dean Weber. I'm Bradley Shaw. We're here today to talk about urns, ashes, a little bit of memorialization maybe. Welcome back.
Hey man, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's cool. Hey, so today I guess we'll jump straight in. Let's talk about ashes. We've spoken a little bit about cremation a while ago with Haley, but give us a quick rundown on ashes and how ashes sort of become ashes.
Right.
And then we can talk about what we do with them.
Right, so the traditional form of which ashes become ashes is when the request for a fire cremation or now a water cremation has taken place. The soft tissue is then reduced in flames and you then have bone matter that is left.
Which is calcified bone only.
Yeah, that's right. And then the remaining parts from the cremation process are put through a cremulator, which basically reduces them down to what we are given back with. Ashes, which is small bone fragment. It's not like fireplace ash. It's small bone fragment.
And so then once you get the ashes back, you can then choose what sort of urn you may decide to choose, or you can decide on, whether the funeral home holds the ashes until maybe someone else goes, or you can, unclaimed ashes is a big issue, country, maybe worldwide. But, let's say someone picks the ashes up and they come, and collect them. What do they usually come in?
For us, and I think my international experience is going to be the same if I think back well enough, is generally you're given back some sort of minimalistic cardboard, plastic, or wooden container, essentially. Something to convey the transport from the crematorium back to the place of resting. Yep, and then a transition generally takes place from there.
And then, so what we would typically do is the ashes would be given to the family, but usually we'd have a conversation with the family before the cremation takes place about what they were wanting to do with the ashes.
Yeah, that one really, I was going to interrupt you earlier, but that one really does sort of come at point of arrangements as to, well, what are your plans with the ashes? And it's amazing that a lot of people really go, oh, I don't know. They don't have any plans for the ashes, and they haven't really thought about it, but all they know is that they want them to be cremated. So it really does seem that a lot of times, I guess my experience in the past is we had sort of a laid-back attitude about them, and we waited for people to come to us to receive them. And then we began to realize that when it falls after a certain amount of time, it's out of mind, out of time, and people forget about them. And so now, and I know we do it here with you as well, is when we've got them into our care, we phone and move them on. Otherwise, you just end up with just stacks and stacks of them.
Yeah, I mean, well, speaking here, we've got ashes from, I think, the 70s, maybe. And not that we were open in the 70s, but there were a couple of funeral homes in the area that closed down, and then their ashes, were given to one of the funeral homes, which was still open. And then I suppose they'd probably been transferred a couple of times before they got to us. So we did a big push, I want to say 18 months, 2 years ago.
It's a double-edged sword. I know where you're going.
And we actually got, we placed a few ashes with family members from 80s, 90s, 70s even. So that was cool, but a lot of effort. And some people are like, oh, were they never claimed?
Yeah.
It's like, they're still here. It's far out. So our advice would always be, hey, if someone passes away and their ashes are here, just, collect them or take them and do something with them, whether that's bury them, scatter them, hold them.
What can you do? People's going to say, well, what am I allowed to do? I got asked the other day, a couple of times, I think I was at a service, and some people came up and asked me if they're legally allowed to scatter them in the ocean. And
that's an interesting.
Yeah, so like New Zealand, say, Australia, what do you find people choose to do with them?
Well, couple of things. One would be the traditional idea of burying the ashes and having a plaque at the cemetery. Sometimes that goes into the ground or into a wall. That's your more traditional offering, I guess you could probably say. The second option would be scattering at a place of significance. So we found over the years a lot of people scatter at sea, or at the beach, or at a rose garden. Quick NB, ashes and roses are no good for each other.
No.
They don't go well. Just in case anyone didn't know, don't scatter ashes on rose gardens.
Yeah.
And then the other option is, holding the ashes until someone else passes away, and then they sort of have it either cremated again, or then they get mixed together and then buried in one plot. Or there's so many different options these days. And I mean, when it comes to reciprocals of urns, like when we talk about the reciprocal of the urn, reciprocal. Potato. You end up with, you can have whatever you want now.
Yeah.
Right, so you've got traditional timber wooden boxes, you've got, like, you might be able to see behind me, necklaces, bracelets. I mean, we've sometimes sold sort of 15, 16, 17 necklaces to the same family because all the grandchildren want to have a piece of grandma.
Yeah. It's with urns, it's really wide open. You can do the mere basics of a cardboard box about the size of a tissue box, called a presentation box, I think they're sold as. And you can do absolutely high-end, heirloom, abstract art things that just are off the chain, creative, cool, and expensive. There's quite a few other things. Have you had any real out there things that people have done with ashes?
Well, I guess we've been working with someone at the moment over a glass blowing.
Oh, to have them inside the glass.
So glass blowing, which is done in New Zealand, so that's certainly a possibility.
Yeah.
I have heard of the diamond. You might be more experienced with this than me.
Yeah, I had somebody come and approach me about that and looked into it all the way up until we got to the cost
price.
part. Yeah. And then it was a big backup. I know you can have ashes put into like 4th of July fireworks.
Oh yeah.
And
shot off into space.
Well, that's another one. You can spread them out over a big area when you're in a firework.
Yeah.
But you can shoot them up into orbit. Gosh, yeah. What else?
There's so many different options.
Oh, right? The other one that we talked about. And I'm a diver. Right. And I've been waiting for someone to ask, but to get some GPS coordinates to somebody's favorite dive spot and chuck them in a reef in a hole, and that they're going to stay and go, yep, there it is, GPS click, and like an artificial reef sort of thing. I think, I think Florida, maybe somewhere like that, there is actually an installed artificial reef for depositing.
Amazing. So, I mean, look, there's so many options out there for ashes and what you can do. And I guess the traditional ones of scattering, in insignificant places for a lot of people is cool. But you do need to be mindful about where you're scattering, how you're scattering, and in New Zealand, how long after the cremation that you do the scattering.
I was just going to bring up the beauty about cremation is it seems like it gives you an endless timeline, or a very convenient timeline to do what you want to do when you want to do it, and that's great. But the time to grieve is when you're supposed to grieve, right close to it. And there's, depending where you live, this is a pretty damp living climate that we've got.
One experience that we sort of spoke about before is that we've had ashes come back to us, whether something's happened or they want the ashes transferred into another container, or they want the ashes mixed with somebody else, and they've solidified.
Yeah, they've gone
concrete. They're
like a brick.
Concrete.
Yeah.
And so for the listeners out there, or the viewers, what should they do to combat that? Because even just the air, we're in the middle of winter in New Zealand right now.
Yeah.
Okay, we're in the middle of winter. So right now it is damp.
It's damp.
It is damp. It is cold. And there is not really much you can do about that. But ashes do not like the damp, and they do not like the cold.
No. I generally, if I get a chance, I always ask people, what are your plans with them from here? And if they're just going to hold them, they just don't know yet, don't feel bad about not putting them up on the mantle or whatever, out where everybody's got to see them. And you got to look after them. If you're going to have a plan with them eventually to look after them and maybe put them in the closet where the hot water cylinder is, keep them warm, keep them dry, keep them loose. Yeah,
100%. And I think, where I've had the experience, and I've actually had it quite a few times recently, of solidified ashes, and it's quite frustrating. It's very hard to work with, especially if you're mixing or changing container. It's like, oh man, this is not easy.
We had a question posed to both of us, I think last week or the week before, when the lady asked us, should I just put one of those silica packs in it? And both of us looked at each other and
maybe.
I don't know. If you've told anyone to put a silica pack in it to keep the moisture out, let us know if it worked.
Yeah, interesting, because it's a bit of a problem here in New Zealand. 100%. I'm starting to sort of figure out, and I'm like, wow, I haven't seen it as bad as I've seen it recently.
Yeah, it's been quite shocking. The one thing I was thinking of while we were talking before, and ashes and memorializing with ashes, is having a service with ashes present has become more and more popular as the cremation has taken place before the service. And it allows you a couple of really cool things about having a service like that. You're not having to deal with the size constraints of a casket. So now you've got this opportunity to really focus on, a memorial table, some sort of focal point. That's not the casket, not something else, and really make it a bit more delicate or a bit nice, or you're not really pressed for space so much, and feels like you're able to be more creative.
Can I challenge you?
Absolutely. I
want to challenge
on the
you.
Spot.
I don't like memorial services, and I'll tell you why. If someone is directly cremated, right? There's no funeral, and then you invite everybody for a memorial service, and they show up and there's a box of ashes at the front.
Yep.
How do you feel about people coming to the funeral or the memorial service and there's just a box of ashes there, compared to coming to the service, seeing the casket, seeing the nameplate, the whole lot is at the front? It's like you go there and the ashes are there, and it's like, we're not actually physically talking to the person because that person's not there anymore.
I hear you.
Whereas when they're in the casket, they're fully there.
Yep. I think you've mentioned.
Do I pose a valid point, Dean?
I think you do. You brought it up not long ago when we talked about processing the steps and the events that need to take place to process it properly, process grief properly. And you talked about the liminal barrier. And I think when you're confronted with the sight of a casket or viewing somebody that's deceased,
when you put your hand on the casket, it's a different feeling to putting your hand on a box of ashes.
It is. I agree. But I think as well, if you're able to bring some other personalization bits around it that complete the picture, that shall I say, like the feeling in your heart that sort of comes and drops when there's a point of loss. I think that the gathering can deliver that. There's the reality of seeing it. Yep. I think I like them.
Okay,
I don't mind them. I like them.
Okay, I'll pose you a question then. Do you think that a memorial service close to the time of death then is better than a memorial service 6 months down the track?
100%. Yep.
Okay, because I can kind of deal with that better.
Yep.
But if you have a direct cremation, for example, and the grief is then basically subsided in a matter of time,
mm-hmm.
and then you go and have a memorial service,
mm-hmm.
it's almost like raising that grief again.
Absolutely.
When you didn't get the opportunity to have the grief to start with.
Absolutely. I think we've all heard at some point in time, whether you've heard the song on the radio, or you've heard the reading, or you've read the Bible, Ecclesiastes, for everything, there's a time and a place. A season is right.
Yeah.
When it's time to grieve, it's time to grieve. When the loss has happened, it's time to grieve. It's time to take care of the matters that are here in front of us now, and then prepare ourselves to move on. To shove those off to, well, I shouldn't say shove, but to slide them off to the side, maybe cover them with a nice comfy duvet, and then have to revisit it in 6 months. I'm a procrastinator, so if I can procrastinate it out long enough, it's like I forgot about it. So I think it's just best.
I think we experienced that a lot with when COVID happened in New Zealand as well, like it did around the world, and funerals weren't able to take place, and everyone said, oh, it's fine, we'll have a service later on, we'll have a service later on. No one did. Very few.
I liked the COVID funerals, by the way. Those 10-person, 10 seats sitting around a casket, no microphones, no judging eyes, no feeling of the pressure. It was just the 10 people that are supposed to be there, and I liked them. I embraced them. I loved them.
Interesting conversation. So I guess one thing I wanted to ask you was, if there's one Ashes memorialization object or product or something that you would love to get involved in, give it to me. What is it? Is it the diving? You want to dive down and do that for somebody?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, in that realm, yes.
Sorry, we're going back here, but back on topic.
Yep, I thoroughly think that is an absolutely cool thing to do. And I've got a mate of mine that, we've talked about this, and that would be the plan. What a service to be able to offer somebody to say, I'll drop them off for you, and I'll mark it, and the fishing reef, whatever, the diving reef. I really like that. What about you? Is there anything that sort of...
Well, I've had a couple of experiences in the past where the funeral home I used to work for owned a boat, and they used to take people out after the funeral on the company's boat, take them out and do the scattering of ashes and have a memorial sort of service out on the water. They'd put a bit of a catering on, and I always thought that was just... that was cool. Another experience I had was another funeral director I worked with. He took some ashes up in a tiger moth for the family.
Yes.
And scattered them out of the tiger moth. That was pretty cool. For me, I don't know. I haven't really thought too much about it, but I reckon that'd be cool. Going up in a plane and.
Speaking of the scattering from a boat and doing it as on company staff, have you ever seen one of the floating biodegradable urns?
Yeah, we had one for about 5 years and couldn't sell it.
Yeah, I used them. I used them a lot.
Really?
Yep. And we had
I think we might even still have it.
Yeah, we had a tour boat that would take you out to one of the islands and a bit of a tiki tour. And one of the guys, the old fella that worked on the boat, also helped me out at the funeral home, and I hooked families up with him, and he would take them out, and at the right place where it's nice and calm and stuff, he'd stop the boat and he'd do a little committal service at the back of the boat, and they'd play a song, and the family would lay this urn in the water, and it would float for about 5 minutes, and then it would start to sink and dissolve, and then the ashes would dissolve down below.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I guess one thing we could say about that is that, especially in our area here, that if you are, scattering ashes in the sea or anything like that, you do need to be mindful of cultural purposes and things like that, and where you do it and how you do it. So that's one sort of side note I would be mindful of.
There's so many elements when you're on the water to have to worry about with wind, tide, swell, water itself.
Even scattering ashes on Earth,
it's tricky.
On land, wind is a serious problem. You do need to be mindful of that. So, hey, well, great podcast. Cool to sit down and talk about ashes. We'll talk a little bit more about memorialization next time, because when it comes to burying of ashes and, the way we scatter ashes, where we scatter ashes, how we scatter ashes, the different types of necklaces and things you can buy and diamonds and all of that. It's been kind of cool to have that discussion with you today. So, hey, we had a little challenge there. That was cool.
Yeah.
Sort of chewed it over.
Yeah, you surprised me.
We've managed to find a little bit of a common ground there. So, great to sit down and talk with you today. And, we'll be back with you guys very soon. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Cheers.